Hezký podvečer. Já vás vítám tady ze sněmovní 7, kde jsme se dneska setkali u kulatého stolu, který pořádá Politický institut TOPAZ ve spolupráci s Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies, což je think tank Evropské lidové strany, a potom s politickou nadací Arno Stiftung. Ještě jednou hezký podvečer. Já zde vítám naše velmi milé hosty, kterým velmi děkuji za to, že přijali naše pozvání k kulatému stolu, který se týká českého předsednictví a české zahraniční politiky. Nicméně nás nejvíce právě zajímá ta část, která se vztahuje jak k minulosti, tak k budoucnosti české evropské politiky, jako by Česko chtělo být v Evropské unii, možná také tak, jaké by mělo být a jaká je vlastně diskuze o evropských otázkách v tom českém prostředí. Já tady nejdřív přivítám naše hosty. Těmi jsou Vendula Kazlavská z Asociace pro mezinárodní otázky, potom z Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies Tomi Hochtanen, Helena Truchlá z agentury STEM, Vít Dostal také z Asociace pro mezinárodní otázky a Aneta Zachová z Euraktivu. Velmi vás tady vítám. A mé jméno je tady Lucie Tungul a pracuji právě v Politickém institutu TOPAZ. A můj úkol tady dnes bude tu diskuzi moderovat a klást případně i otázky za vás, když se na nás díváte. Já nejdřív poprosím všechny naše hosty, aby velmi krátce
First, I will hand over to our guests to present the main ideas regarding our today's topic, and then we will have a debate. So I will now hand over to our guests. Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. I will be very brief. When we take a look at the Czech European policy, we might call it rather negatively, because before the presidency we did not have a clear vision, there were no ambitions, there was not a long-term vision of where we would like to do. And this also corresponded to how politicians spoke in the Czech context as well as in the international context. Even before the presidency, we've heard that it was necessary to survive, that our presidency did not have enough money, and that it would be very difficult. But I'm very happy to say now that this negative vision is not being fulfilled. It seems that our diplomats are doing a great job, and we have heard a lot of positive feedback from the EU, showing that the Czech foreign policy is, or Czech diplomacy is able to react accordingly at the EU level. What we need to do is to ensure that the Czech presidency really makes it possible for the Czech foreign policy to be something long-term, to be a natural part of what we are doing, that it is not something extra, but something where we have a clear vision and where we know where we want to go. The Czech presidency gave a clear direction to our foreign policy. Also, the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis showed a clear direction. But what we need to ensure is that after the presidency, our diplomats and politicians will play an active role, and that we do not blame for all problems at the EU. We have very good diplomats, but what we need to have clear vision stipulated by our politicians and very good communication, and I also believe that the communication in this regard is something rather problematic.
Hello, and thank you, Lucy, and first of all, thank you for Konrad Adenauer Foundation, but of course for TOPAZ for organizing this session. Very briefly, as opening statement, I can a little bit remind, what is the setting with the presidency. Before the European Union had the president of the council, the presidency was much more visible, or the presidency of one country was much more visible. Now it has become little bit less on the profile, but nevertheless important in context of especially the political processes in the country. And I guess the question for me as a foreigner in Czechia is how does it look like? And I would say that you know, if you look the profile of the European Union during these crises which were mentioned, I think Czechia has has had a good touch and good impact on policies. If you look a little bit on the topical selection of the priorities, I think they pretty much fit exactly what are the current challenges of the European Union. Czech presidency time has not been the easy. We are in the middle of transition in European politics, having main focus, of course, in the economic conditions because of the post-COVID situation, war in Ukraine, and of course on the defense. And I guess until end of the presidency, those issues will remain the most challenging. What we see, and especially we are now in the beginning of November. Upcoming 4 months will be very defining and important for the whole how EU's approach and strategy, not only short term but long term, will look like. And about the energy crisis and our response of the EU, what we will see is very clearly a debate. My own prediction would be to say that we will see that this whole Green Deal agenda will remain very important, but we will also see that the numbers do not end up. That what I mean is that we will see need for renewables, but the demand for the other energy sources will continue, and that will bring me to my final point, which is to say that looking at the foreign policy, because the title of this discussion is to speak about also foreign policy objectives, we see a more and more need for understanding what is happening in Asia, Central Asia, which will be more important for Europe's energy security, North Africa, all of that will be much more in our plate. So I keep it that as an opening statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I will be speaking on the basis of... Pardon. Ještě jednou moc děkuji za pozvání.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I will speak on the basis of the data that we have available together with our association or the STEM agency. We might say that the presidency is successful or has been successful until now. It is determining the view of Czech people of Europe. Why is this important? And why is this positive? The good news is that even though we are in a crisis situation, in an energy crisis situation, this situation is defining the presidency's agenda, and it also determines what people hear about the EU. So that's the main topic, dealing with the high prices and social impacts. Other topics are rather in the background, such as the war in Ukraine. It has not disappeared, of course, but what people see mainly are high prices, and they are worried what the future will bring. Who is responsible for the crisis situation? That is not clear yet. Those responsible can be found in many different places, also in the EU and in EU institutions. And this goes hand in hand with the topic which is going to be important in the upcoming months and years. It will be important for the perception of the Czech public, of the EU by the Czech public, and also when looking for our foreign policy. This is Green Deal. Green Deal is something that people tend to see in a negative way. So we will have to look at the challenges such as decarbonization, clean energy, energy transformation, etc. And we have to find ways how to communicate these challenges and these measures so that people do not resist as much as today. If the green transformation is not social, if it does not take into account everybody, it may end up not being successful at all. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. In my introduction, I would like to present 3 topics which I believe are going to be crucial for the debate about the Czech foreign policy in the upcoming months. We sometimes forget about these topics, but I believe they are important for the perception in our society. I don't want to talk that much about the past or the future, but what might come up in the future. The first important topic is going to be the further deepening of European integration. We have heard about the Green Deal and about integration in this area, and this is one of the examples of unprecedented integration. In future, there will be more areas like that. These areas will have to do with the robotization at work, with digitization. These are areas where Europe is not integrated that much yet, and there will be opportunities for further integration. This will create pressure on the Czech Republic and on the Czech European policy. The Czech economy has benefited from good education, but we have always been a little poorer and a little dirtier, so to say. And I believe that these topics are going to impact the perception of Czech European policy by the people in the Czech Republic. So that was the first area which I find crucial, and this may have an impact also on other areas because the door is open for emotions, for people claiming that Europe is imposing something on us and that we do not like it. The second topic, I believe, is going to be the question of European solidarity. I believe that this is an area which we have not explained sufficiently yet. We don't know what it might involve. In general, the Czech Republic has been the receiver of European solidarity. We have been receiving, especially financially, from the EU rather than giving. And I believe that inside we might have a complex about the asymmetric way of integration since our integration to the EU, and we might think that this will continue in the future, and that it is a, so to say, vicious cycle. This might change in the future, however, and we might become a net payer. Thanks to the data provided by STEM, we know that only 44% of citizens do not know that we get more money from the EU than we give to the EU. But this might change soon, and we are not ready for this discussion. So we will have to explain the benefits of European integration, not only by getting finance from the EU. And the third topic that we will have to deal with has to do with the expansion of the European integration space, integration zone. This discussion started also in connection with the war in Ukraine and with the EU application by Ukraine. So I believe this is a discussion which we need to have in the future, because this integration might have an impact on our society. Let's remember what happened after 2004 in Western Europe. Western Europe had difficulties dealing with the expansion of the EU, and then this division between the western part and the eastern part of the EU was a result of that. There were complicated discussions. There were issues with migration, but I believe that it did not only have to do with migration. And in the future, we will have to deal with the Green Deal when talking about integration as well. Thank you.
Já si teda dovolím navázat.
I would like to follow up on what has been said. Let me focus on the HR issues of Czech foreign policy. When the presidency started, we could see quite a fight over the budget of the Czech Republic, and we also heard that the Czech state will not be able to afford to hire more diplomats, more experts for the presidency. I believe it is important to look at this not only from the perspective of the presidency, which means that now we are presiding all the committees and we need the necessary experts for this, but the lack of staff is a great problem, a great obstacle for building of Czech foreign policy in relationship towards the EU. If you look at it, you will see that just a small team of people are very active in our presidency. There is just a dozen of these people, and they are doing a great job, as our colleague Vendula already said. They work in an excellent manner, but there is a lack of these experts. And what the state is currently doing is that it is closing the door, or it's not looking at the people who would like to be active and be involved in working for the Czech Republic or to work for the public administration and to create the EU agenda at various ministries. The Czech state is closing the doors also to students who are interested in European affairs, but also in the energy or finance. Many of these students do their studies at foreign universities because that's logical.
Rozhled, takže studium na zahraniční univerzitě je velice dobrá volba, ale třeba máme pořád v Česku problém například s uznáváním těch zahraničních diplomů. Takže třeba to, co se teď dělo během předsednictví, a nejsou to jenom nějaké ojedinělé případy, bylo, že přišli třeba absolventi těchto škol ze zahraničí a vlastně oni nemohli ani nastoupit do české státní správy, protože neuznáváme jejich diplom z zahraniční univerzity a vnímáme jako maturanty, jako absolventy střední školy, což je opravdu tristní a bohužel tohle se potom promítá i do toho, jak jsou třeba Češi dostáváni, nebo jak se Češi dostávají do evropských institucí. Samozřejmě, že v Evropském parlamentu máme nějakou tu kvótu 21 europoslanců, ale to je vlastně jediná instituce, kde máme nějaké dané číslo, kolik Čechů tam musí být, a klíčová třeba v tvorbě zákonu je Evropská komise a tam skutečně ta míra Čechů, to zastoupení českých občanů není kdo ví jaké a nejde jenom o počty, ale jde samozřejmě o kvalitu. Takže co já bych velice doporučila Česku, aby, řekněme, se ponaučilo z toho předsednictví, aby si uvědomilo, jak je to velice důležité vytvářet tu svou evropskou agendu, aby se zaměřilo na to, aby si pěstovalo schopné lidi, experty na různá témata, na evropskou agendu, na energetiku. Třeba teď jsme, jak už tady zaznělo, jsme v nějaké energetické krizi a vlastně stát pomalu nemá lidi, kteří by byli schopni nějakým způsobem řešit, nebo kteří by byli schopni v Bruselu se účastnit těch náročných jednání a přicházet tam s nějakými nápady a s nějakými konkrétními řešeními. Takže pokud toto nezlepšíme, tak se, myslím, nezlepší ani vůbec ta naše schopnost prosazovat.
Thank you very much for these introductory speeches. Let me sum it up briefly. I will just reiterate the main topics. I assume we will probably agree that we need to keep the importance of the topic even after the end of the presidency. EU policy should not be just a topic of a few people who are interested in this, because there are many important issues, for example, energy or enlargement of the EU. And each of these topics, of course, presents both benefits but also major issues, and we need to discuss both. We heard that communication about these topics has been difficult and it should improve. What we also said was that we need to have a solid background for this, not only in Brussels, but also as regards cooperation with foreign countries. It takes me to the question that I'm going to give to everyone, and it doesn't matter who is going to respond. Do you think that in the next period, with regard to the major issues that have emerged, that there is a risk that the EU will again be forgotten, that it will just be shown in articles on the 4th or 5th page of the newspaper? And what can we do to prevent this situation? And then I have one specific question to Tommy, but also to others. How do you think that the partners in the EU perceive the Czech Republic, be it in the institutions or elsewhere? How do they view us as negotiators or as partners for negotiating certain priority issues? Let me start. I have a long-term experience from the media sector, and I will give you one simple answer which presents unrealistic solution. To prevent a situation in which we will forget about the EU, we would need to restructure the strategy of the PR agencies and media agencies. EU is usually a topic covered by the foreign departments in media agencies. These departments are usually neglected compared to other departments within the media agencies, and it's quite logical because a standard Czech citizen, or the majority Czech population, is not so much interested in EU affairs. So what can we do to prevent this? We should support media agencies. For example, if you have an enlightened editor-in-chief, and they should be aware of the fact that the Czech presidency in the EU is highly important, and they should probably dedicate a specific person for this topic. If it will be an expert who will know a lot about the issues, it will be someone who can go to the field, talk to people, and the person can also discover what are the main painful points and issues of Czech citizens, and then the agencies can write articles that will be much more interesting for the people. It can bring a difference, because if you write an article about negotiations in the EU that will be boring, it will not create an interest in everyone. So we have to do it through the media agencies. And let me add a few words to the funds, the money, the financial benefits. Only 25% of Czechs know that we receive more than we pay in the European budget. When we asked what do people think that we are going to pay, well, we will still get a financial benefit from it in 2021 to 2027, only 7% of people knew how it was. So there is a huge gap in knowledge about EU. Let me follow up with more and more unrealistic solutions. I I would like to speak about politicians. Ministers are usually not the people who would have a European vision. It's great that we now have a Minister for European Affairs. This position should not just mean that this is a minister who would defend the presidency of the Council in the EU, and it should be someone who will really open the Czech discussion about European policies. And it should be someone who will not be a conflicting person. It should not be a person for a discussion about the shift to the qualified majority voting within the EU. We need to support a better approach to the EU among Czech citizens. But we can see also the potential somewhere else. We need to improve communication of other ministries. I believe that they will know how to do it well during the presidency, because the data of STEM have showed that Czechs very much like success stories of Czech people. And if we say that our success in the EU is a Czech success story, then you will get more confidence. I often say that it would be great to not communicate it, for example, in a way that the EU has prohibited to manufacture plastic spoons. Who is actually the Minister of Environment? It's Minister Jurečka. So instead, Minister Jurečka would like to promote the use of glass bottles in the entire EU. So if we can shift the communication in this way, it will bring a benefit. We need to communicate it as a Czech success story. That would be great, but to be able to do this, we need to communicate the results of the councils by ministries. We know what the Parliament or the Commission approved, and there is a huge discussion of these issues, and it's often said that the European Union promotes or approves something, but it's just a proposal that may be shaped by member states. Or sometimes it can be a draft resolution of the European Parliament. And it's clear that this resolution is not going to be adopted, but the media discuss this issue a lot, while the ministers remain silent. I would like to follow up on what Vít said. Helena gave tasks to journalists, and I would give tasks to ministers. Most people in the Czech Republic don't actually know that our ministers represent the Czech Republic in the council meetings. And this is caused by the lack of communication. And what we have to resolve in the Czech Republic sometimes has roots in the EU policy. The previous governments didn't have EU as a political priority, and quite a lot of ministers did not attend the meetings in Brussels. For this reason, they didn't know their counterparts, they didn't know what was being negotiated, and they could not provide the feedback to the Czech citizens. And this has an impact on the staffing as well, because if you don't know your counterparts, if you don't know the key persons in the EU institutions, it will be very hard to do lobbying for Czech people in the institutions. And tenders are so specialized that we need to do the lobbying, that we need to choose whom we want to have at a particular position. If we know the EU closely, if we are able to communicate about the EU, then this information will be taken over by the journalists, and this is the main task for the political representation of the Czech Republic also after the end of the presidency.
Thank you. So my question was, how does the Czech presidency look outside? So first point there, of course, how is the domestic discussion about the success in Czechia is pretty much different, of course, how it is played out outside. Of course, as mentioned, the particular challenge of the Czech presidency was and is that you had very particular situation because of war in Ukraine, the consequences of that, which meant that we were not in the business as usual situation. That meant that the many issues which kind of can resonate in a domestic discussions in Czechia don't play outside so much because the media space is full about war, energy crisis, consequences, nuclear war, what have you. So that's a little bit, and also that created a situation where, you know, the presidency of Czech Republic had a little bit less room of maneuver on defining on the topics what they wanted to push, because it was clear that some issues related to specific regulation, for example, which under normal circumstances maybe would have played more, would not going to do that in Brussels. However, and I come what I said in the beginning, I think in this crisis, during and before the Czech presidency, I think European Union could have done more, but has, without doubt, played a very strong role in many areas. We have taken, for example, the whole discussion on the common defense, which was also one issue where the Czech presidency wanted to deal with. There are steps forward. EU has, performed. It has not been easy. And so, if I would be, the decision, I don't know, leading figure in Czechia, I would turn it around and say, look, EU has delivered, even more than maybe assumed in the beginning, and for sure, the presidency of Czechia needs to be thanked for that. So in that sense, that's how I would play it. But as I said, it has not been a business as usual situation for the presidency.
Abych to ještě uzavřela.
Let me also say a few words when we take a look at how the Czech presidency is perceived outside of the Czech Republic. I would like to say a few words on that. I cooperate also with the Brussels branch of Euractiv, and I have to say that that the presidency has been better than what had been expected from the presidency before it started. Two more remarks on my part. More interest in the EU does not only have to do with the presidency, but it was visible even before, during the pandemics. During the pandemics, many people looked to Brussels for solutions because there were issues on the borders, there were issues with the vaccines. Investments were necessary in the vaccines, and many people in the Czech Republic sort of woke up and found out that we were not living in a vacuum, that we were a part of Europe. And I believe that there was also a change about how media informed about European issues, also mainstream media. So that was my first remark. And now my second remark. We often say that the EU does not have enough space in the media, that Czech people do not know Czech MEPs. But when we take a look at Czech policy and Czech politicians, I believe that the situation is not much better. If you asked people in the street to name 10 members of parliament in the Czech Republic, I think that most people would have difficulties naming them. Also, if you asked people what legislation has been approved over the last 6 months in the Czech Republic, most people would not be able to answer that question. So it's not only about not enough interest in EU policy, but in politics in general. Thank you very much. Now, many questions come up. I teach at university and I teach students who specialize in the European Union. And it is true that when I ask them what their plans for the future were, they do not usually mention European institutions. They mention some other institutes and organizations. Do you think this has to do also with the fact that Czech ministers did not often take part in council meetings, also that Czech regions, most of them do not have their representatives in Brussels anymore? Is it one of the reasons? And another question before I hand over to our listeners. Could you say what might be the main topics in the future that the Czech Republic should try to promote in the EU in the future? What the Czech Republic might agree on, I mean the political parties in the Czech Republic, what they might agree on, so that we make sure that if the government changes, these preferences do not change. So what are the topics, what are the preferences for the future? And one more question. Of course, we all know the EU level, and my question is, what pays off for countries at the EU level? How should they act during negotiations, and what they should avoid? What does not pay off? Maybe Tommy?
You refer to presidency, no? Okay. Generally, well, topically, so what again? So if you look for the presidency, of course, you know, we have the 3 levels. We have the domestic discussion. We have the, you know, then the files, you know, the running files, regulatory proposals, which goes council by council. And then thirdly, and I think you refer to that, what are the regional priorities or the clear priorities for the country in question. Now you are asking what could be those priorities for Czechia. Of course, for me, your national priorities are difficult to guess. But what I can see, as I say, that the big discussions are the question of energy. You already mentioned the Green Deal. I think the whole discussion will be much more complex. I think what we are going to see is as I said, the coming of in upcoming years, the whole discussion about the nuclear energy, where one dimension is very clearly the economic feasibility, not together, of course, with the sensitivity. So that's one discussion. Secondly, and that discussion has already been started during this crisis, during this war, is the whole discussion of European defense, those priorities, what are the tools, you know, in summary, what we are going to see, well, we can see during the war, it has been very clear that the NATO is the main platform for European defense, but nevertheless, the European Union has played a very important role. Also, to Central and Eastern Europe, which classically has been much more, you know, reluctant to the European defense cooperation in order not to undermine NATO, is much more open to that. So I see that those, and also our studies in the Martin Center show that there's a certain openness to that. But as previous speakers have said, I think what we are going to see is that the whole discussion about, you know, the bread and butter issues are going to come back. We are seeing interest rates going up, we see inflation going up, We have been now, because of the crisis for 2, 3, 4 years, the countries have taken extreme amount of debt. There has not been much discussion about the consequences of that, but now we see in Italy the question of the euro's future is there. We could see in the UK what happened. We had the new prime minister proposed agenda, which was pretty much no-go. The market reacted, and that's quite particular because UK economy has classically been very strong one, and now we could see that the fragility, not only the UK economy, but the whole European landscape is having impact on political discussion. So my conclusion is that the whole reform discussion is going to come back about the healthcare, about the education, about those factors. Many of them, no, most of them, which are not in, they're not in EU competence, but nevertheless, those are the issues which you will see also in, I would claim and guess that in the political discussion in Czechia, those issues are going to come back.
Tak já navážu na předřečníka.
I will pick up on what the previous speaker said. He talked about defense, and we know that defense is something that Czech citizens expect from the EU. Defense, safety, that feeling that someone is protecting you. And this is something that the EU has not been very strong in. Aneta talked about the perception of the EU, and I believe that it is important to show where the EU is protecting us. That, for example, thanks to the EU, we have been able to get vaccines together. We as Europe are going to buy gas. That we are facing these huge crises together, these crises that each member state cannot face independently. And these crises are, of course, the energy crisis, climate change, rising prices, etc. Climate change or fight against climate change is something that the Czech Republic should discuss, and we should try to unify our position within the Czech Republic regarding the fight against climate change and the Green Deal. Of course, we need to transform the Czech economy, and we might use EU funds to do that. Of course, we need to ensure for the transformation to be social. Thank you very much. Let me pick up on what we've heard. Previous speakers talked about energy. I'm not sure that the Czech Republic can, in Europe, formulate the energy policy, because over the past few years we have developed 28-29% dependence on Russia in the area of energy. So I believe that that's something we have to deal with first before we come up with some requirements at the EU level. One of the topics which is not that sexy as energy or migration, but what I think is important is the internal market. That's something we view as something automatic, but the previous crises have shown that it is not that self-evident, and in the future the internal market has to be deepened, and it is not only an EU interest, it is also a national interest, and we know that if the EU interest and the national interests are the same, it is a win-win situation for both sides. The Czech economy is dependent on exports to other EU countries, and what we have to do is to remove obstacles on the internal market and try to ensure good functioning of the internal market. We have witnessed measures in Germany to support the economy, and the Czech Republic is now pointing out that if you are helping your economy, you have to be aware of the impact on the internal market. I believe that the internal market is a topic which is not that often promoted by other member states, so there's a huge potential for us. Another topic I would like to mention is digitalization, or the creation of a free market of data as the fifth freedom, apart from the free movement of capital, services, goods, etc. So the development of digitalization, that's going to be crucial. The Czech Republic has also had it as its priority during the presidency, and I believe that it is something that should be continued. So that's what has not been mentioned yet.
Já navážu, jestli můžu. Já vlastně tu otázku.
You have given us a question regarding the priorities, and I would try to look at it from different perspectives. You often want to know what will be the interesting aspects of the Czech Republic, what we will bring to others. And it seems to me that the motivation of this question is that we have a feeling that we are not useful, that we should become visible, and that we should catch up with the other countries. And I don't think that this is the perspective that we should use. If you are successful in lobbying for your interests, it means that you won't even notice that there has been some lobbying, and I think this is an approach that the Czech Republic should adopt. And second, we can also look at it from the point of view of what our industry currently needs. In that case, you would definitely not be a fan of Green Deal and Fit for 55. But you can also look at that from the perspective of long-term interests. And then we should definitely be fans of the Green Deal. The Czech Republic is a country benefiting from the current situation. It is an open country from the economic point of view, but at the same time it is quite a culturally closed country. Before the war, if you looked at the migration situation, at the rate of minorities and the migration rates after 2004, then we could say that we were not one of the countries that could be perceived as culturally open countries. And I believe that this is going to change naturally. However, we need to be careful because our country should be ready for these changes. What should be the general objective of the Czech Republic in the EU? Building a Europe which will provide for our safety, security and development. The result should be something that will give the countries such as the Czech Republic, the middle-sized countries, the possibility to fulfill their objectives, and at the same time we have to think about the readiness to adopt all these changes, the readiness of society, and this is related to the cultural closeness of the country. Thank you. I will try to be brief and specific. I noted down altogether 4 topics that I think could be supported by all parties in the Czech Republic. One of them is China. The Czech Republic is currently looking for a new position, a new relationship with China with regard to the situation in Russia. And we have a lot of experts and our own knowledge in this area. We also have our allies in the Baltic countries. However, the public will not support this political issue. It is always important to define certain aspects of the transformation to the low emission or no emission-free economy. For example, we could emphasize the food security and food self-sufficiency issue. And if we cooperate within the EU, we will be able to ensure supplies of lithium, copper, or other metals that are so necessary. They will be needed for the renewable energy sources, but also for standard wires. And there will be an increasing demand for this type of products in Europe. The next aspect is environmental protection. We should try to prevent environmental diversity. It is also linked to the emissions. And the third aspect is linking emission-free transport with other areas. We are situated in the middle of Europe, and we can see that all the TEN-T networks, the fast tracks are situated away from the Czech Republic. So we can see a space for great improvement. This can be something very tangible for any citizen. Thank you very much. We have fewer than 10 minutes left. Therefore, I would like to ask whether someone in the audience has a question. Otherwise, I will have a question to our panelists. If you have any question, just raise your hand and we will give you the floor. We mentioned China as well, because we need an ally. Do you think it is important that the Czech Republic establishes relationships with allies, or should it have some long-term allies, or should it look for the allies based on the issue that is currently negotiated within the EU, because we need to promote our own interest? This is the very essence of European cooperation. You can never expect that we will agree on all topics with everyone. Creating partnerships and alliances is absolutely natural. It's not only about V4. For example, there is a clear interest that we have in common with Finland. It is the nuclear energy. There are other interests that we have in common with France, or we can, for example, deepen the internal market. So these are authentic interests. And based on these interests, you create natural partnerships or alliances with other countries within the EU. And this is related to what Helena and Vendula mentioned. We should look for narratives that are important for society, and the ex-Prime Minister Babiš always says that you should take the phone and you should call to the ministry, you should speak about your own experience, and that we can take our joint steps and measures. This is the very essence of European cooperation. Different countries can adopt a joint approach on a certain issue. I think that Helena was very clear about this. Let me, however, remind you that the European Union is not just an abstract body explaining something. It represents specific member states. I saw one interview on the EDNES website, and the editor asked what the EU actually wants from us, and the other person tried to explain that EU is represented by member states, and it shows that sometimes there is a lack of agreement among member states. If you try to organize a party with your students at high school, you will probably know that it's very difficult. You have 27 member states within the EU, so you need to establish formal partnerships where it's beneficial for you.
Maybe a comment on sideways. I think what we are seeing a little bit in you know, not only for Czechia but all countries, the basic challenge is that you know, we have more and more domestic problems, not all the economic, energy-related, which has roots in the international European situation. So that's one. But on the same time, as I said in the beginning, you have this need, even you know, when you analyze the implication for your domestic politics and no doubt for European politics, to have more information and better understanding on what is happening, not only in definitely in Europe, but not only the European neighborhood, but beyond. You mentioned China, you know, but also understanding how we deal with China, what are the dynamics. You know, you need to also then to understand a little bit what is happens in Southeast Asia, what can be our partners, what has happening now with US, Japan, Australia, for example, etc., etc. And many times smaller countries, which I come from Finland, so we are a little bit in the same category, that's the problem a little bit. You don't have so many persons there to you know, feed the discussion and contribute to the political establishment. But as mentioned, you know, very clearly the war in Ukraine, if we see how the dynamics have been, very clearly have demonstrated, and I think are demonstrating also for the European citizens, and I assume also here in Czechia, is that we, you know, it's almost cliche, but if there is no united position of Europe or some kind of critical mass, we are just played the side. We are not there, and I think this is, and there is a more and more need, and I think that if you look the war in this whole last year, and maybe thanks to Czechian presidency for its part, we see more cooperation, we see much more common delegation, common intents to speak with the other European leaders. And that doesn't come because of some moral high stand, it comes from the factual, you know, factual needs. And so that's a little bit the landscape. It is, you know, related within Europe, outside Europe, because more and more as a need for even more member states. But on the other hand, it becomes more challenging because the domestic gravity of domestic issues is more and more demanding.
Jestli můžu...
I would like to follow up on this question and to reshape the question. I don't think it's hard to find an ally among member states. I can't think of any example where the Czech Republic would remain isolated. There are very few examples in which the other member states voted against our proposal. I think that there were just 2 such examples within the European Commission. And there was a massive campaign about this, so it was the weapon directive and the quota for migrants. So I don't believe that this is an issue of the member states. We should look for allies and partners, and we should create and develop the mainstream. And this is something that relates to the European Commission and the European Parliament. They should be able to define the agenda before it is proposed to the institution, before it starts to be an issue discussed in the institutions. This is something that could improve. I would agree that up till now, Czech politics was reactive. We just waited for what is going to come, and then we started forming alliances. But we have been members for 18 years already, so we should be one of the more active states and to come up with initiatives. We could see this in the area of nuclear energy. The Czech Republic was extremely active, and I think that we should be so active also in other areas, not only in these highly specific and critical interests. This is an approach that we should adopt also in other areas. And as regards cooperation, we should not look only at the European Union, because the Czech Republic was a proponent of the enlargement of the EU. Unfortunately, this was transformed into the priority entitled Ukraine during our presidency. Negotiations are held with North Macedonia and Slovenia. So there are negotiations about the accession of North Macedonia in the EU. So the Czech Republic also performs these activities that are quite invisible, and I think that we can be very active and that we can build the relationships with countries around the EU in its neighborhood. It is not in our interest to create a vacuum in the neighborhood of the European Union.
Fakticky vás máme pro vás, máme vás pro sebe tady. Vlastně všechny otázky, které
All the questions that I had have already been asked. So let me ask one question which will bring us back to the beginning. At the beginning we said that we have learned more about the European agenda recently, also thanks to the fact that we have a Ministry for European Affairs. We have also said that there are some inevitable processes in the area of further European integration. We've said that we as a small member state are not able to be on our own, even in sectors where we wanted to do everything ourselves, such as health. We are not able to close international agreements on our own. We need European representation for the defense policy, for foreign policy, etc. So it is probably that very soon these integration processes will be very fast, and I can see there a danger. If we stay being a country which is not able to set its own agenda, then I'm worried that there will be a two-speed Europe that we have heard about. We still have some examples of a two-speed Europe. For example, in the area of the euro, the Czech Republic is still hesitating regarding the euro. At the beginning, we asked what we could do to continue working on the topics that we have started working on during the presidency. So, to conclude, I personally believe that we in the Czech Republic have certain issues in structures, in the system, in systematic communication. We are very good at improvising, but in European institutions, in the legislative processes, we are still lagging behind. We are not able to react in time. It might be a good idea to keep the Ministry for European Affairs and maybe expand its competencies, or what else would you recommend to do to ensure that we will take more initiatives in the future at the European level?
Jak byste ještě jinak zlepšili komunikaci?
So how would you otherwise improve communication, not only through political elites and journalists? I would like to react to that and go back to what we said at the beginning. I believe that education is crucial in this respect. In Czechia, we have difficulties with that. People finishing their secondary schools have no idea about the European Union. So why would they choose to study European affairs? So I believe education is crucial, and it is also crucial to educate people at the ministries. I mentioned something like that at the beginning. In the Czech Republic, we need to have more experts on the EU. I believe that if we had more experts on the EU, many of the issues that we have discussed would be solved, and it would be a good idea to destigmatize the European Union.
Not maybe on the communication, but just for the previous speaker, just to jump on it. Actually, that is the benefit of the discussions like that, or importance, because evolution, there's a constant evolution in the European Union, no? Obviously. And the impact of one country to that process depends, of course, if the country has more or less managed to take a position or has common view or not. And many times we can see, not only in Czechia, but in many countries, even the much bigger ones, it's very difficult for political establishment to, when issue comes up, to then take a position if there is if there has not been any discussion with society. What do you think about that? And so that's exactly the encouragement why these kind of discussions are important. In order to, of course, it's also the education, informing, etc. But that gives a basis for the individual countries and that their political establishments then, when the issue is on the EU's agenda, to formulate that position, have a certainty that that's the direction that our country wants to go and have a real impact.
Já budu velmi stručná.
I'll be very brief. The Czech government and the Czech Republic is currently creating a tool for strategic communication in different institutions. We can have different views on this process. It is a question what the result will be, but what we can agree on is that it is crucial that the Czech Republic is, and the European Union is a crucial part of this strategic communication. I'll be brief. The European states which want to integrate more are already integrating more. For example, the euro or the common purchasing of gas, it's going to be voluntary as well. So no one is forcing us to do anything here. And it depends on us what goals, what targets we set for ourselves, what we decide to do. For example, whether we want to discuss proposals with the European Commission before they propose anything, whether we want to have people on key posts in the European Commission. And of course, communication is crucial in the media, but and also at the ministries. But I believe that it is also crucial that the prime ministers and the ministers have the EU as a priority. We saw it with the previous prime minister who did not have the EU as a priority, and then the ministers did not go to EU meetings. I believe that this is a task for this government, because the opposition is Eurosceptic, more or less. The opposition is formed by two Eurosceptic countries. And if we do not have a strategic system of communication about European issues, if it is not done by this government, then it will not be done in the future. So that was my first remark. And my second remark, I believe that we are already moving in a certain direction. I believe that we should not expect that we will be westernized, that our discussions will be more similar to the discussions in the West. I believe that where we are is a result of a certain process, and it will develop slowly. We know from the STEM data that the division among pro and against the EU is 50-50% in the Czech Republic. Some people are critical, but they're positive. They don't like the EU, but they like European cooperation. Some people do not trust the EU. They are worried about the future. And that's why if you ask them this simple question, yes or no, they rather say no. But that's something we can work with. We do not need to primarily go through the EU level. People often judge the government or the EU according to their actual situation, whether they are doing well or not. The new upcoming generation is very different. In spring, the generation which was already born in the EU is going to do their A-levels. So, of course, they have different views of the EU and different expectations. And my last remark on the two-speed Europe. I stopped being worried about that at the moment when Germany agreed with the recovery fund, and Germany said, okay, we are going to borrow money, but the EU as a whole. So that means that the EU created an extra budget for extra investments. So this basically stopped all the debates about any common borrowing by the Eurozone. There was a risk at the time that would create a two-speed Europe, which would be difficult to overcome if we are not in the euro area. Helena mentioned that the high-speed trains actually stop on the borders of the Czech Republic, and that the situation is the same like before 2004. And I suppose that's something we should work on as well.
Yes,
Thank you very much for your reactions. Let me sum up now that what we can agree on is that we primarily need enough experts to be able to resolve larger crises or topics that we have not expected. These are situations in which we need to ensure that the people will understand the situation and that they will understand what they can negotiate with the partners in the EU so that we have high quality communication, so that we are not so much improvisers and that we are more in the control of the debates. We were well prepared for the presidency, and what we should also be able to do is to flexibly respond to the situation. We will also agree that we need to communicate in a different manner, also at the level of ministers. They should be able to explain transparently why they are going to the EU, what they are going to negotiate about, because this will attract the interest of journalists and also the public. And what we can also agree on is that the current issues should be resolved and that we should go back to the business as usual, as Tommy mentioned, so that we can focus on our daily business. And the EU presents the opportunities for development and for discussions which are impossible to be held in the domestic environment. I would like to thank everyone who came to this event. I would like to thank all the panelists, and I would also like to thank all of the 3 partners for supporting this event, and I'm looking forward to any upcoming events. Thank you and have a nice evening.